Our next speaker is Krissy Chan, and Krissy has demonstrated probably as good climate citizenship as I've seen from anybody. And I think that's a really important thing to mention, because we talk in this program and in climate change generally about incentivizing the private sector to do certain things, about policies to create incentives for adoption of this or that. But it really is about what we consume and the way we live and what we value. And you know, I've started eating a lot less meat in the last year and done other things in a much more socially responsible way. And I've been around a lot of people at Scripps and elsewhere who have been excellent role models for how to be climate citizens. But I don't know that I've seen anybody actually do it all and then communicate it all without judgment and in such a positive way as Krissy. So I anticipate that Krissy is going to have an absolutely outsized impact in her career and life, and encouraging other people to be better climate citizens and really making a difference in an impactful way. And really proud to have her in the program. The floor is yours, Krissy.
Thank you, Corey, so much. That was so sweet. I'm going to be talking about solutions to California's wildfires, and my emphasis is going to be on Indigenous stewardship and traditional ecological knowledge. So first, we're going to go into an introduction to fire management. Then we're going to look at the Indigenous perspective, along with comparing it with prescribed burns, fire suppression. Next, we're going to look at a graph, a map of wildfires versus prescribed burns. And then additional methods of prevention, such as looking at the transmission system. And then we're going to look at implementation barriers and my policy solutions, and lastly, the conclusion. Right, so for fire management. So from the Indigenous perspective, fire management, it's called cultural burns, and it's based on traditional ecological knowledge, which is knowledge gained over multiple generations, and just living in the same region and knowing the land and understanding how to interact with it. And so it's the intentional use of fire for, there's many benefits and many reasons. One of them is for traditional food sources, such as acorns. By using fires, you can remove a lot of the invasive species, and this allows the oak trees to flourish and reach maturity and produce a lot of acorns, which is a staple of Yurok, Kurok, and many tribal diets. And then it's also helpful for deer and elk populations. So Indigenous people would use the controlled burns to rotate deer and elk out of into and out of different areas, and this is very helpful for for promoting more new growth, as well as carbon sequestration by protecting the upper layer of the topsoil. And then this is also very helpful for basket weaving material, which is very integral to your culture and many different Indigenous cultures, and that is for hazel. So when young hazel is treated with fire, it goes in these long strands, which is perfect for basket weaving. Otherwise, it's in a tangled bush, and you can't use it. There's no use for it. And then also, there's many climate change mitigation benefits for this, and this is by first reducing a lot of the fuel and thinning out the forest in a sustainable way. You prevent a lot of wildfires, and then it's also very helpful for stopping erosion and protecting the watersheds. And then so here we have pictured the Klamath River, which is home to the Kurok, Yurok, and Hoopa tribes. And they have been performing prescribed burns for thousands of years. And it wasn't until about 100 years ago when the US government had a lot of policies towards fire suppression. And then it wasn't until 2013 when the Yurok tribe was able to bring burns back. And this was made possible with successful collaborations with CAL FIRE, which is the California Department of Forestry and Fire Prevention. And they were able to hold TREX trainings, which are prescribed burn trainings. All right, so on the other hand, we have prescribed burns, and this is also the intentional use of fire. However, it's more carried out by government agencies such as CAL FIRE and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then their main goal is to reduce fuel and improve wildlife habitat. And it usually includes a burn plan, a smoke management plan, and an environmental impact analysis. And so as you can see, this is a much more formal method, but it's also less of a connection with the land. All right, so for fire suppression, this indirectly began in the 1830s with the Indian Removal Act, and this forced Native Americans off of their land in many areas. And so beyond the horrific trauma this caused, it also removed a lot of the stewards of the land and a lot of the land management was taken away, as well as fire management in a lot of these areas. And so following that, we had in the 1870s really large wildfires in the Midwest, and these decimated areas and destroyed millions of acres. And so the U.S.'s response to this was full fire suppression, and this was prompted by conservationists of the time wanting to protect the pristine and untouched land. And that was a false narrative spread by settlers to spread the idea that this land wasn't lived on, no one lived there, and no one was touching it, when in reality, indigenous people had been cultivating the land, managing it, and manipulating it to get the perfect resources for them for thousands of years. And so with this, there were new policies and new chemicals introduced. One of them was the Smokey the Bear campaign, which we all know of, especially growing up in California. All fire is bad, and that's what they were spreading. And then also in the picture we have, oops, I guess it's not working. Frost check, and that's the red stuff that the planes drop. This works by stopping advancing flames, and it's a fire retardant, so it's very damaging to, if it touches the plants or wood, it actually burns it, and it makes it more susceptible for disease and invasive species. And it's also very damaging to springs as well, as if it gets in the water, it has fertilizer in it, so it raises the concentration of ammonia, which causes the fish to go into a coma and die. And then there's also the use of foam fire suppressants, which are highly drying, and these are irritating to the skin and eyes, and this can impact wildlife as well, and also very damaging to streams. So if this gets in the streams, this blocks the fish, blocks their gills, and suffocates the fish. And then so this policy has been going on about 100 years, started in 1911, and we have not seen improved conditions. We've actually seen wildfires worsen since it's been implemented. And so this is just a graph to show the amount of money California spent on fire suppression. As you can see, we've had 2 huge blips over the last 2 decades, and that's correlated with the heat waves and the droughts we've seen in California. And so it looks like it's starting very low, but it's actually in 1979, this is 12 million. And then just last year, it was going in like a couple $100 million each year spending for fire suppression. And then just last year, we reached 1 billion. And then this is only over the course of 40 years, not the whole 100 years that we've had fire suppression. California spent 9.2 billion in fire suppression. And that's not including damages to property as well as loss of life. And so this is a map in GIS I made. And you can see the blue is like towards the east. And that's just showing like the national forest. And then also we have along the coastline, the orange and yellow and some of the pink and red. That's showing like different severities of wildfire risk for these areas. And then like there's little dotted areas that are like the different wildfires that have happened in the last, I have like 2010s and 2000s and so on. And then so very small in like the central California area, we see, these are prescribed burns, and there's a few up north as well. And so you can just see like the amount of prescribed burns versus fires is very, very low. And so fortunately, Governor Newsom has pledged $536 million towards fire prevention. And he has, the main focus of his work is towards prescribed burns and getting a lot more co-management with indigenous tribes. And so the state and federal governments have had a target of 500,000 burns, controlled burns per year by 2025. And they want to up this to 1 million acres by after 2025. And so we're not on target yet. The California Air Resources Board, it said that we have 125,000 acres that are burned per year as of now. All right, so hopping into wildfire prevention. So beyond currently like just performing more prescribed burns to remove a lot of the dead detritus and thinning out the forest a little bit more, there are other prevention techniques that need to be taken into account. And so one of the issues is with the transmission line. So a lot of it is outdated and mismanaged, and this leads to transmission line failures, which leads to wildfires. And so it's a little hard to correct this, as Pacific Gas and Electric, which serves most of California, is bankrupt. So this might require some state ownership or another company taking over it, but mainly they're going to need to do a lot more hardening of the lines, and that would require making the towers and the power lines more fire resilient, as well as implementing more microgrids and more renewables into diversifying the energy sources, which would allow, diversifying? Yes, which would, prevent more blackouts in California. And then there are also other additional implementation barriers. So these are mainly funding, permitting, liability, and intersections between the different government entities. And so fortunately, we have a lot more funding going into this. We're gonna have a lot more burns going on. One of the main things that have been preventing a lot of these burns is not enough fire professionals or people who are trained in this. And this is often due to fear of liability and all the permitting that's required. So with air quality, obviously that's like a huge concern with the smoke impacts. And so getting past a lot of those regulations, it's important to recognize that wildfires, they have a lot more smoke impacts and we can't control them. Whereas when you have a controlled burn, you can account for wind direction and atmospheric stability. So you can make sure that the wind direction isn't going to these sensitive populations. And also for atmospheric stability, making sure the air is, the smoke is rising up and then dispersing all over, rather than just staying to the ground, which is not safe. And so like streamlining these processes is gonna be very important, especially for fire professionals such as Frank Lake. He's of the Karuk and York tribes. He wanted to do a small burn on his property, and he had to go through all these different regulations and getting all these permits passed. When he's been a fire professional for 20 years, he's worked for the Forest Service, he's a fire ecologist, and he still has to pay like for a burn boss, which costs like thousands of dollars per hour. So finding a way to streamline that process is very important. Also liability. In California, there's no insurance for fire practitioners, and this stops a lot of homeowners from doing burns on their property because you can face financial ruin if anything goes wrong. And then also there's issues with the wildland-urban interface. So this is people moving from urban areas into more rural areas, and this is due to the housing crisis in California. And it's a lot cheaper in these rural areas. However, a lot of homeowners are finding that they're losing home insurance because insurance companies don't want to cover for all the fires. And then lastly, of course, huge intersections between the government entities such as state, local, federal, and tribal. One of the methods Newsom has recommended for addressing this is to foster a lot of these relationships and collaborations and encourage, especially working with tribal communities. And then for my policy solutions, I think it's very important that we recognize tribal sovereignty and traditional ecological knowledge, particularly with co-management of the forest, but also giving leadership roles in the implementation of more prescribed burns, because Indigenous people have been doing these burns for thousands of years. They're fire-adapted communities, and they deserve to be able to be the ones leading these policies. And then also we need to get insurance for fire practitioners. One of the things Newsom mentioned was looking into this, but it's very important that we get it. In the southeastern parts of the United States, there is insurance for fire practitioners. It's more viewed as you have experience with fire, so you can have insurance. It makes a lot more sense there. And so finding a way to implement that here is very important. And this goes down to, there was an Assembly Bill 2585, which was introduced in 2018. However, it got killed in one of the committees. And so bringing up more public support for insurance for fire practitioners and getting legislators on board is going to be very important to getting the insurance. And then lastly, increasing subsidies and incentives to move people out of the wildland-urban interface. So really pushing for affordable housing. This has faced a lot of backlash with landowners not wanting it in their backyard. And it's very important to get a lot of these people out of these rural areas, because once you get more people out of the rural areas, you're able to perform a lot more prescribed burns, and you're even able to let wildfires burn themselves out in the forested areas. And yeah, so for in conclusion, I think it's very important to recognize that Governor Newsom and California are doing a lot to address the state's wildfires, but it's also important to remember, we need to also reframe residents' views on fire, along with the continued efforts to work with tribal communities and put them at the forefront of these policies if we are to reach 500,000 acres burned per year by 2025. Yeah.
Rad. Thank you so much, Krissy. Any questions from anybody in the room? Michael, that was enthusiastic. Hopefully your question will match the enthusiasm. Sorry.
Great job. So you said in the South that people can do these prescribed burns and they're insured much easier, or if at all. What is the difference? What is the argument? I guess why is the insurance model set up there but not here? You would think there'd be a market here for that.
It's strange. I feel like it's more just California being so against any wildfires or any fires at all. And just like even socially, like if you say you're doing a fire, you probably get a lot of backlash. And so it's just viewed a lot differently. I learned a lot about how to perform a prescribed burn just from like Indiana posted like a full list of all the things you need to look for. And I don't know, like I guess in the Southeast, it's viewed as like farmers, ranchers, timbermen all do this already. So much more accepted.
Thank you.
It's kind of a general thought, but we're in a situation where we have people who have been here and have lifestyles established here for hundreds of years, way before we, whatever that means, got here. And to engage in practices to protect land that they've been on and have rights to for hundreds of years, they have to deal with a web of state and federal laws. Just without getting into the laws or policy or details, what do you think about that? This loss of agency of Indigenous people to keep themselves safe from fire. What do you think the path is to solving that problem, other than just allowing people? But in the modern world, how can we make it so Indigenous people can have stewardship of their lands without having, like negative effects outside of that system?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess it just goes down to more respecting Indigenous rights and respecting that they know what they're doing with a lot of these land management practices, and that they've cared for the land. And yeah, I guess like that's like the main difference also in like the southern areas. Like this is seen as like white people also do this, so it's more accepted, I guess. Yeah, that's a good one, and that's going to take a lot of work to get these coalitions built. So,
any additional questions? Annika, sorry.
Great job, Krissy. I was wondering, to reach that goal of 500,000 acres, are any lands excluded from that? For example, national parks, just out of curiosity.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Oh, I'm sorry. To reach the goal of 500,000 acres burned, are any lands excluded from that? For example, national parks or protected areas?
I'm not sure. I think national parks and national forests are a big part of that, though.
Okay.
Because I think that's like where a lot of the wildfires occur. So like getting the land management down there. And another thing to add is like a big part of the plan is thinning out the forest, which I was a little unsure about. But as long as it's done in a sustainable way and it leaves the old growth trees, which are more resilient to fires, and then takes the younger ones, it's a lot better. But yeah, that's like a big thing, is going into the national parks and the national forests. So.
Thank you.